So greater than, less than, not equal to, and equal to are technically what we call comparison operators. They compare two values, right? Is this less than this other thing? Is this not equal to the other thing? Is this equal, greater, and so on? But now we're actually going to take a look at an example of a logical operator. Now, if you have any experience with other programming languages, you probably are familiar with logical and logical or, logical not. But if you're not, don't worry at all. It's simple enough to pick up, and it is one of the most useful pieces of MySQL syntax when writing complicated queries. So we'll take it step by step from the beginning. Imagine that I wanted to write a query to select all the books written by Dave Eggers that were published after the year 2010. Well, there's two basic pieces of information here that we're filtering by. We're selecting by author, where author is equal to Dave Eggers, or just Eggers maybe for last name. And then secondarily, we're also finding books released after 2010. So we can write those two queries individually, right? We can select the books written by Dave Eggers. Select star from books where author last name is equal to Eggers. And we can select the books published after the year 2010. Select star from books where release year is greater than 2010. And if I ran this here, we can see there's 3 Dave Eggers books. And then if I ran this one here to find the books released after 2010, there's 5 books there. And what I want is the overlap, right? I want the books that were released after 2010 and have author last name of Eggers, which is these 2 books here, A Hologram for the King and The Circle. And that's what this slide shows here. I want author L name equal to Eggers and release year greater than 2010. Both of those need to be true. I want those books. And the way that we do that is by using AND. Capital AND, doesn't have to be capitalized, but AND will join together 2 or more different pieces of logic. So here's our first condition. Author last name is equal to Eggers, and at the same time, release year is greater than 2010. So in order for a book to be included in the results of this query, to be selected, this has to come out to be true, and this has to come out to be true. If only one of them is true, then that book doesn't count. It's not included, right? If the author last name is Eggers, but release year is 2005, then this thing is not true. The whole statement is untrue. So why don't we try writing this? Let's do it in a separate file. So instead of select star, let's do title, author last name, and release year from books. And then I'll do my first piece where, let's do it based off of release year first, where release year is equal, or rather is greater than 2010. And then afterwards, I'm going to say, and I also want to know where author last name is exactly equal to Eggers. So let's run this query. And there we go. Only 2 rows that matched. Both of them have author last name of Eggers, and release year is greater than 2010. So that's our first example. Here's a more complicated example. We can chain on as many as we want. I can keep going and say author last name is Eggers, and release year is greater than 2010, and also the title is like this string. It includes novel in the middle. So if I do that, let me just build up this query over here. So we'll do the same thing as before, but we'll add on another and. I can keep going as many times as I want. Now, all 3 of these pieces, these 3 different comparisons, all have to be true. Release year greater than 2010. Author last name is exactly Eggers. And the title is like novel, meaning it contains novel somewhere in there because we've got the percent signs on either side. So all 3 of those have to be true. And there's only one match. A Hologram for the King, it contains novel. Author last name, Eggers. Release year is greater than 2010. 2012 is greater than 2010. So this is incredibly useful. We can combine all of the different tools, the different comparisons that we've learned so far, and make more complicated queries. Now let's actually dial it back for a moment and talk about how AND works. So there's a left and a right side. And in order for AND to evaluate to true, this whole thing to be true, the left side has to be true and the right side has to be true. Now, that makes sense, just based off of how we think about this and what we mean generally when we say the word and, if I was just reading this, released year is greater than 2010 and author last name is Eggers, we know in order for and to be true, both of those have to be true, right? If we had a book that was released in 2010, but author last name was Smith, well, the left side would be true. Well, actually, it wouldn't be true because I said greater than 2010. So let's say it was 2011, greater than 2010. So that's true. But then the right side would be false. And that means the entire thing is false. So I can actually prove that this is how it works if we just do something simple like this. Select, remember how we can do this. 3 is greater than 1. If it is true, we get 1 as the answer. And if I did 3 is greater than 4, we get 0 for false. So I can do this. Select, let's do something we know is going to be true. 1 is greater than 0. That is true. We get 1. And let's say 8 is equal to 8. Stupid, but true. So the whole thing evaluates to true. But if I change this a little bit, so now the right side is false, the whole thing evaluates to false. Remember, 0 means false. So this is true, this is false. When we have and in the middle, that means the whole thing is false. The only way for and to be true is when both sides are true. So let's try one more example. Why don't we do something sort of silly? Let's find the books that have a title that is at least, let's say, 15 characters. So long titles and also a large number of pages. So we'll start with the first bit. This is a little trickier than what we've done so far. How do I know how many characters are in the title, and how do I compare that to 15? Well, I can do something like this. We're going to use a string function. Remember char length. So I'll do something like select char length of the title from books. But that's just going to print to me or select the value of the character length, the number of characters in the title. Maybe not that useful. What I want to do is select the title and then from books where the character length of the title, let's say it's greater than 30. So now I'm getting the titles of the books that have long titles. And there we are. So these are long titles. We have nothing to do with and at the moment. But now I want to add in this condition, this additional stipulation that says not only do I want the ones that have long titles, but they also have to be long books. So let's just do it on a separate line. And pages, I don't know, pages is greater than 500. Do we have any? I think there's at least one. There's 2 of them. Why don't we also display pages or retrieve pages so we can verify? Okay, so we've got a title over here, The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, that has to be greater than 30 characters. And again, we're not just directly comparing title, but we're comparing the character length of the title. And then pages has to be greater than 500 at the same time. So there's other books that are more than 500 pages, but they don't have long titles. And there's other long titles, like what we talk about when we talk about love, that don't have 500 plus pages. So we're getting the intersection, only the rows that have this true and this true. So that's logical, and we can use it to create really complex queries and keep adding on if we wanted to, different conditions and make things more and more specific.